the invocation and then the Pledge of Allegiance this morning. May we bow in prayer. Gracious Heavenly Father, we say thank you for the night of rest and for this opportunity to serve and to be present this morning. Lead, guide, and direct us. We pray that today we meet with the folks at the public library system. We lift up and support and pray for the leaders, the staff, and all those that support our main library and all the other auxiliary libraries. Lord, direct them and guide them. Help us to serve in the way you've taught us to do. We pray in thy name. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. With that, I'll officially go ahead and call our February 28th meeting to order. And we have the minutes here to be approved this morning for January 31st, February 7th, and February 14th. We want to do those collectively, or we want to approve each one individually?
I'd just go ahead and do them individually.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. All right. Yeah. January 31st then? Is that a motion?
Motion approved.
Okay. We have a motion and a second for January 31st minutes. All in favor by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Thank you. Okay. February 7th.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Thank you. And lastly, the minutes from last week, or 2 weeks ago, I guess, February 14th.
Let's switch it up. Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay. Thank you. Motion is second. All in favor by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Thank you. Okay. Next up is Commissioners' reports and comments. Mr. Kiefer, you want to go first this week?
Yes, sir. You had to call on me first.
No, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Frog in my throat. My only comment, I'd like to congratulate I believe it was the Hagerstown Rotary Club, the Sunrise Rotary Club, and Williamsport Rotary Club for their bull and oyster roast over the weekend. I attended. I know you did, John, and a couple others did as well. And I was told it was one of their best turnouts and just a great fundraiser. So good to see a lot of people in the community.
Okay.
That's all.
Thank you. Mr. Harvey?
Thank you, President Barr. Just a few things to talk about. First of all, I'd like to thank Mayor Martinez for spending some time with me last week over lunch and an extended conversation about Hagerstown, and it was greatly appreciated to get her insights and her views about where she would like to go in the city, and I look forward to continued engagements with her. I'd also like to thank the county administrator and the public relations staff for working with Antietam Cable to begin rebroadcasting the county commissioner meetings in the near future. They will take our recording and then broadcast it at a later time. And I think that's important. I think there was one other development. If you might want to comment on it, John, before I continue.
So I do want to thank Ashley and Danielle and all of our members of the PR team who reached out to Antietam Cable. I also met with Tony Heaton last week from Antietam Cable and talked to them about broadcasting our meetings on they'll replay those, so they won't be live, but we're still working out the details. But once we know those, we can provide those to everyone. I've also talked to Tony about broadcasting our State of the County videos, so they've agreed to do that as well at no cost to us. And we're also going to reach out to some other cable providers in Washington County that cover some of the areas, I think in Hancock and other areas. So we're going to try to reach out to them to see if we can talk to them about possibly doing something on their cable network as well. And the final thing, I don't think you mentioned it, but so our meetings, you can go onto YouTube, on our YouTube channel and watch those meetings. And so our PR department went through, and so before you could use the bar at the bottom and scroll through and try to find the spot you were looking for. Now they're gonna go in, and they did it for last week's meeting, and put, I think they were calling them chapters, but they're markers, so you can go through and click on a certain area and go right to that part of the meeting. So our PR department, I think Jonathan from our PR department is gonna do that every week. So from now on, when you go onto our YouTube channel, you'll be able to look at that and try to make it easier for citizens to find the part of the meeting they're looking for. So our PR department has been working hard on those issues, and as soon as we know exactly when those replays are gonna be, we'll let you know.
Great, that's super. My next comment is about, just a little bit about philosophy. I know we have a group of volunteers who are nominated by our commissioners who are actually charged with making recommendations for how to divvy up the financial support to community organizations. And also, next month, they're going to be working on the charitable 501c3s. And that's an important work. But I think philosophically, since I don't have a person on there that, I help choose or represents my interests, I just want to share a few thoughts about how we might think about the policy, the criteria, the processes and procedures for providing a framework as they go forward with their work, and how we should probably think about it as we support our community and allocate these scarce resources to these 501c3s. I think the first imperative should be to provide support to the less fortunate in our community, the needy and the disadvantaged. Need is the priority to me for the basics of life like food and shelter. Second, I'd like them to think about simple questions. What is the organization's mission? What are their measures of effectiveness? And what is the actual impact that they're having in our community? What are they doing? How well are they doing what they're supposed to be doing? And are they doing things that they shouldn't be doing? Third, is the organization effective at fundraising from the community? I think that's an important measure. And I'm not talking about success in securing grants or government allocations. Fourth, and this is really important, transparency. What is the financial balance sheet? Where's the money being spent? How much is that on top salaries? Are there expense accounts for events, parties, clothes, and who is spending the money, and for what are they spending the money? Are there dollars in the bank? How solvent are they? In other words, are they good stewards of the money, and are they deserving of the public's continued support, and how much? Now, lastly, last week we had a discussion about a bill in Annapolis to remove the amusement tax. And we need to look at that in some detail before making any decision. Even though we discussed it last week, we haven't made a final decision about whether or not the county should, on its own, remove it. Now, we also have a hotel tax of 6% and this amusement tax, and we get a certain amount of money from both. But we need to know what is the amount we receive and consider the impact of the municipality. So we get about $317,000 a year. It could be going up in the future with the baseball stadium for Hagerstown's perspective, or Boonesboro gets $14,000 a year. We get asked a lot for small amounts of money to the municipalities. So these small amounts matter, and it adds up. This $317,000 is part of the financial foundation for what we do, and it may seem like a small amount. If we were to cut the tax, it would not impact probably the cost for our constituents buying things or going to the golf range or at the movie theater. But I'm not sure we know what the real impact is going to be on businesses. I, for one, have not heard from one business person yet or constituent asking for the amusement tax to be cut. Now, in the future, maybe the baseball project will bring in even more money for Hagerstown through that tax. I don't know. But $319,000, $317,000 over 3 years is going to be $1 million. And the Maryland Theater costs $140,000 a year. So we could fund that for a long time with this amount of money. And we're asked a lot to give up money. You know, this is asking us to take a cut. and then we have to find a way to replace it from somewhere else in the budget. And then we get mandates for the schools, for the libraries, for the county health department, for the election board, and maybe for tax incentives for new housing construction. But that still comes out of our bottom line. My point is that small cuts, they may seem like small cuts to somebody in Annapolis, but they impact our decision-making here where the rubber hits the road. Senator Dirksen once said, $1 billion here, $1 billion there, pretty soon you're talking about real money. And this is real money to us, okay? I'm for tax cuts, but everywhere I look, I see more and more requirements coming, and we are not flush with cash. We don't have a great surplus. We've got more requirements, more demands, and everyone up here knows this. So I would be thinking that we need to be very careful about how we approach any of these issues dealing with tax cuts or ending any revenue stream. So thank you very much, President Barr.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wagner?
Good morning. I also was able to attend the Bull and Oyster Roast. It was, congratulations to Rotaries across our county for a successful event. There was, as I think Commissioner Kiefer said, I think they were sold out at 1,200. So it was a big crowd. So I also wanted to ask staff, and I think, John, you and I have talked about this. Do we have a policy yet on coming up, or how are we going to address the fast approaching cannabis laws in Maryland for our employees, and are we working on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, staff is looking at that from an HR perspective and from a legal perspective as to how we're gonna do that. Every county's obviously faced with the same thing, but you have mentioned it before, and we've been looking at that, because it's coming, and we're gonna have to address it come the fall, so, staff is looking at that, so we'll be able to report back to you on that.
Yeah, because I think it's going to get here pretty quick, and then we're going to have staff coming in saying, here, we got an issue here, we got an issue there.
Right, oh, yeah, it's not easy, obviously you still have the federal law relating to that, and now the state of Maryland, so.
Right.
That causes us some issues with all the federal grants we receive and those issues, so it's not easy, so we're looking at it, and again, we won't, we're not the only ones that are facing this, so across the state, I know, during, some of our county administrator conferences, we've had discussions about how counties are looking at that, and everybody knows we're gonna struggle with how to approach that with our employees, so.
I'd like to also offer that we communicate with MACO, because I know it's a very heavy topic across the state through MACO.
All right, thank you. On Commissioner Harvey's comments, I had a few follow-ups. The CFO funding, and I think you got this. I think they have a criteria to go by, but it might not be as detailed as what you're requesting, and I tend to agree. I think accountability and transparency is a big deal for who we're giving the money to, the nonprofits. So, I sort of agree with those comments. And then the amusement tax, I had a couple. And I tend to agree with most of everything you said. I think one on our step further would be, we have 9 municipalities, and some of them aren't affected by amusement tax either, but so let's just say Boonesboro gets $15,000 amusement tax. Well, they're going to lose that. And $15,000, even though it seems to be a small percentage in the general fund, is something that if you add all those municipalities up, who do realize a loss of amusement tax, I think what we're going to see is they're going to, it could, right now there's 14,000 here or 300 and some thousand there. It's unknown what Hagerstown's going to generate with the new projects, but I think you're going to see that grand total coming back to the county, wanting us to help them make up those losses. So it's more of an impact on the county government here than what we might think. So that bothers me a little bit, what that grand total comes back to us in Boonesboro. Okay, now, they come and ask for, I'm using them as an example, all the municipalities, they come and say, we need a 30 grand for this, or Clear Spring or whoever. So we don't have it now because they just took our amusement tax, even though it might not be as much as 30 grand by any means. We're still going to have to make it up somewhere. So that's my concern with that. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Good morning, everyone. I, too, attended the Rotary Bull Roast. Special occasion. It was in memorial for the late Dave Henneberger, who was the champion of that event. And I think from here on out, it'll be a memorial to his service to the Rotary, so just want to recognize his name. Also went to the Morgansville Rotary Breakfast. It was a Rotary weekend on Saturday. I want to thank the Parks and Rec Department for their superhero event they had Friday night, returning back to attendance of numbers prior to COVID. It was a lot of participants. We had several of our deputies there, and they had the armored car and superheroes everywhere. And then I also attended the Long Meadow Fire Company banquet, and there was 3 awards to 3 people who had 50 years of service. And the single one of them was Brian Pyle, who 50 years of service was also Firefighter of the Year. So thanks to all the folks out at Long Meadow Fire Company. And then I also went to the Fire Association meeting during our stay of meeting. So again, thank you to all the volunteers. That concludes my report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Klein. Yes, I also attended the Morgansville Ruritan Club breakfast meeting on Saturday. Attended the Rotary Bull and Oyster Roast, as has already been mentioned here, on Sunday. For me, on Wednesdays, every Wednesday, if I don't go to Annapolis, I Zoom in and participate in some of the committees, and most importantly, the legislative committee meeting at MACO. And as the session actually heads into the very busy season from midpoint on, MACO is naturally very busy going over key bills, key points of interest, and their meetings get rather long and very much involved. I think last week when I Zoomed in, there were 62 participants on that Zoom meeting. So you can imagine it's rather difficult to keep up with. Also attended on Sunday, I know Paulie was there. We were at the Liberation Church down outside of Funkstown. They had a Black History Month service, I guess, and it was several hours long, and it was well attended, and it was quite the service. So thanks to all the pastors and folks in this community that worked very hard to put that together and bring folks to a meeting and to a very nice service. A couple other things. We always try to do upcoming events. Tomorrow night is the Chamber of Commerce Annual Business Awards. I think a couple of us are scheduled or signed up to go to that. Along with that, tomorrow evening, there's I don't know if anyone saw it, I got a excuse me, notification. Town of Keedysville is having a public information session, 6 p.m. at Town Hall, 19 South Main Street in Keedysville. I didn't know if anyone was either interested or was available to attend that. It's regarding Verizon installing antennas on the town's water tower, and apparently it's open to the public and for public comment. So if anyone chooses to or would like to attend that. March 4th, which is this weekend, Fair Play Fire Company Banquet, Fair Play Fire Hall. Then on March 7th, next week is probably part of our commissioners meeting, I would guess, the State of the City.
I won't technically be part of the meeting, but it will be, well, our meeting will start a little bit later.
Right.
I don't
Okay.
think we've set the exact time, probably about 9:30 instead of 9 o'clock, because at least some commissioners will be attending the State of the City.
Yeah. And then also later that week, I know it's, I guess it's after our meeting, but March the 11th, the Leitersburg Fire Company Banquet, the Knights of Columbus. So keep those on your radar screen. And I think that's about it. Any other thoughts or comments that anyone's like to add in? Hearing none, then we'll move into staff comments, and Neil Duran from the airport. Good morning, Neil.
Good Good morning, Commissioners. I come before you to inquire about the possibility of receiving a letter of support for a congressionally directed spending request for the airport. We're seeking $7.7 million for a replacement air traffic control tower project. The FAA has an existing program that covers 100% of the costs for structures like that. It's our intent to submit a request through Senator Cardin, Senator Van Hollen, and Representative Trone. We have an urgent need for this tower due to the insufficient height of the existing tower to be able to see the full extent of the airfield visually, and also problems of obsolescence. Our existing tower is from the 1960s. We've already collected a number of letters from airport stakeholders that would like to see this happen. It's been an identified need for a number of years now, and we've been advised that if we could have a letter of support from this body, or perhaps from President Barr on behalf of this body, it would add additional weight and strength to our application. We have a draft letter for your consideration, 3 letters, in fact, that would be sent to Trone, Van Hollen, and Cardin. Be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Is that a consensus or a motion?
Could be either.
Yeah, I'd motion to approve that letter.
Second.
Okay, motion is second. All in favor by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Thank you.
Thank
Yep,
you all.
absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Okay. And Neil, and of course, Randy, you probably know this. Wasn't that tower used when we got it in? Back
Yeah,
in the
it was
day?
used. It was a used tower, and it's short. We don't even have visibility we can't even see over to the fuel pumps, or parts of 27, taxiway, right? Down at the run-up area.
Yes, the easternmost extent of our northern full parallel taxiway cannot be seen, such as the run-up area. And also due to the height of adjacent hangars, which are quite tall, a good portion of the parking area or apron cannot be seen. The launch and landing of a medical helicopter service or something. It gives you one example of something that's obscured by lines of sight.
Any idea about the timeline? I know it's a long way out, but you would hope to have this approved and in by 25, maybe? I don't know.
I think we've already done a siting study, so it would have to be designed and constructed. And typically, that might be able to be done in 2 to 3 years from approval. This is important to take advantage of this special program that just doesn't happen very often, funds for the tower. So there's about $100 million set aside for this purpose, and you have about a 5-year window with awards each year, $20 million across 5 years. So we're hoping to get this done as soon as possible and have an award that would pay fully for design and construction. So if the answer is no, or the disappointment of the earmark process not working, we will still try the regular channels through FAA, AIP as well.
Just one more question for clarification for me. Right, currently we have contract 8 air traffic controllers, right? And they're paid for by?
Yes, it's called the Federal Contract Tower Program. So the staffing with the company Midwest ATC is separately paid for.
Yeah, and it would stay the same even with the new tower, correct?
Yeah, it doesn't affect the funding for the staffing. The request is we would manage the project, we would design and build the tower, and we're also putting in there the request that the tower could be turned over to FAA ownership so that they could continue to provide for the O&M costs. We had a positive meeting with a regional manager from the FAA that oversees the individuals that maintain navigational aids at our airport and maintain this facility. And at least in the initial meeting, he was receptive to the idea of, once again, taking ownership of it and maintaining that status quo. Because I'll give you an example. Frederick, Maryland recently got a tower constructed, but they had to assume ownership of that new tower. And so it takes approximately $90,000 a year out of the airport budget to pay for the utilities and the repairs and the maintenance. And they estimated 10 to 25 hours a month of staff time to just look after the needs of the new structure. So we are going to make the request that this tower continue to be owned and maintained by FAA people. But of course, if that's a condition to this, the only way you'll get the 7.7 is if you assume ownership. Well, that'll be a subject that we will give further deliberations to and bring before you if necessary.
Thanks, Neil.
Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. Dave Mason, Tower Event. Good morning, Dave.
Morning, Commissioners.
Morning.
Dave Mason, Deputy Director of Solid Waste, with Tony Drury, Recycling Coordinator. Good morning, Commissioners. So we came here this morning, just want to kind of give you a heads up on an event that's coming up. It's going to be May 5th, 6th, 8th, and the 9th at the 40 West landfill. We're going to be doing a agricultural scrap tire collection event. This event is sponsored by Maryland Environmental Services, and they, in conjunction with Maryland Department of the Environment and the Farm Bureaus, are the ones who are putting up the money for this. So basically, what they have allowed us to do, we're going to do a 4-day event. We have $60,000 allocated. Any and all farmers in Washington County can bring an unlimited amount of tires to the landfill. $60,000 sounds like a lot, but unfortunately for us, that only allows us to collect about 200 tons, because we have to pay $300 a ton to have them shipped down to Baltimore. So what I'm going to be doing is keeping constant track of the weights that are coming in and updating my voicemail, letting folks know where we stand on that. Dave and I have already spoken with Leslie Hart, and she is going to be sending out information to all the folks that are in the Farm Bureau, and just kind of letting everybody know that we're going to have this, but it's not going to be something, we're going to have to cut it off because we haven't had one in 7 years, and we're figuring we're going to get a lot of tires. And if we don't cut it off, we could go 50,000 or more over what they have allotted for us. So.
The plan is for 4 days, but we're gonna monitor it, and we might have to cut it short.
Right.
You know, we're pretty sure we're gonna do Friday and Saturday, but Monday and Tuesday may be questionable.
So when you cut it short, Dave, how do you communicate quickly to farmers so they're not loading up and arriving with a truckload of tires and they become frustrated?
Yeah, we're gonna work with PR, we're gonna work with Farm Bureau, Leslie Hart, to try to get the word out as soon as possible. Like Tony said, he's gonna update his voicemail. We'll have the recording on the solid waste line to give updates as often as we can.
Yeah, Leslie has wording in the notice stating that we have a certain quantity that we, once we beat that quantity, we will stop. The only phone number that is on that notice is my phone number, so I will be there and, like I say, constantly figuring out how much is coming in. I mean, for example, last time we did this was a little over 7 years ago. By the time this starts, I mean, we had farmers coming in with triaxle or the tandems coming in and just dumping tons of tires on us. So we have to monitor it closely, and they are to be made aware of to call that number first before they come
Okay,
and deliver. Now, if it comes to a point where we go over a couple of tons, it's not going to be a major factor for us, but we just don't want it to get too out of hand. This money comes every time new tire is bought. There's an 80-cent fee that goes along with it for collection for scrap tire events. So this is money that went strictly for the ag tires. They also do citizen scrap tire days, which we did one back in September of last year as well. Any other questions?
I have a question sort of off, not to put you on the spot, Dave, but how's the credit card thing coming along? I had a call the other day.
We're up and running, we're good.
You're up and running?
We're good. I mean, we still have some glitches here or there, but
Right, okay.
for the most part, we're good to go.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Mr. Martirano.
I was gonna say, I think I have a list here, but I think we've covered them all. I want to talk about Antietam Cable and those issues. Started the meeting next week with the state of the city. I'll just, one comment on the community organizational funding. I mean, obviously, just a little bit of a history. The commissioners put that together when they were getting a number of requests for funding. So they put together that whole process to try to avoid just the individuals coming in. So we did set up a process. There are some criteria. I know there's been some discussions about looking at those criteria. So, you know, I think if the board wants to do that, I think obviously staff would want to work with the board on that after this process, after we go through this one, because we're already knee-deep into this one. But look, if there's additional criteria and the different things the commissioners want to do. But I think it's a good program. It's worked good for a long time. And so if the commissioners want to look at some additional criteria, staff would want to work with you on that. So
I would appreciate it. I'd like to have a consensus that we would ask the staff to take a look at, you know, improving the policy, procedures, and processes going forward, not for this iteration, but,
Not for this one.
you know, for the next years.
right, and staff we would have the resource to do that after we get through this round of funding. So if the commissioners would like to do that.
I believe with the community funding organization, we can always look at it again, that's fine. I know we made a revision, was it last year or maybe the year before, to look at including capital projects?
Right.
So it's kind of the needs from the community kind of arose, and I guess consensus among commissioner staff.
Right, that's right.
We did make an
We did
adjustment
make that
recently.
change. So that's a good point. I mean, we have been changing it around, but that's the latest one, and that was a pretty big change. And I think that was probably a good change moving forward. So, you know, we always try to, I know staff always does, and I think the board does too, continue to review those processes. So, you know, we'll continue to do that, and we'll take a deeper look at it this year if the board's direction.
Being in good standing as a 501c3 with the state alone is not, you know, what we should be looking at. We should have, you know, a layering of you know, things that are of concern to us that we want to understand, you know, whether it's financial, business practices, transparency, that type of thing, as well as are they even effective?
Okay. I think we've covered everything that was on my list. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next up is citizens,
Just have one item.
oh, I'm sorry, Kurt.
Commissioners, Senator Quarterman sent a letter to the commissioners regarding the admissions and amusement tax. As you know, the commissioners directed my office to prepare a letter regarding SB 533. That letter has been prepared, but it has not been sent to the committees yet. In light of Senator Quarterman's letter, I just wanted to see whether there was any further direction from the board regarding its position on SB 533.
Could you clarify what we have in the letter? Are we saying we are not inclined to support the letter? Or are we, the bill, or are we said we would rather take that under consideration at our level? What did we say?
At the board's last meeting, the commissioners voted to oppose SB 533, which is the bill that repeals the authority for the county and municipalities in Washington County to impose the admissions and amusement tax. The letter goes on to state that the board is considering whether to terminate the collection of the admissions and amusement tax here in Washington County. However, the board would like to retain the authority to impose or forgo the tax based on future economic conditions, and the board further believes that municipalities in Washington County should have the same policy discretion.
We have a motion and to send that response.
Well, that was a position.
That was the position last week.
weeks ago.
Obviously, the board received a letter from Senator Quarterman last night,
Right.
which I think you've all seen. So I think he's asking you to have further discussion about that.
Okay.
But
I already addressed this issue earlier, and I think that letter, as drafted, addresses what we need here at this point in time. I don't think there's a consensus to
Support the bill.
support the bill.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, consensus, we're clear? Okay. Very good. Anything else?
That's it.
Okay, next up is citizens' participation. This is an opportunity for citizens to comment about an issue or issues of county practices and interests. This is not an interactive dialogue or question and answer session. It is solely time to hear citizens' comments. Please limit your remarks to 3 minutes or less. Thank you. Do we have citizens here this morning? Good morning.
Morning.
You want to give your name and address so we...
I've been here before in front of you commissioners regarding the Colonel Henry Kidd Douglas Drive on Sharpsburg Pike. That'll be renamed because it's named after a Confederate officer. And this morning, the reason for that is in this current climate, we know that name tied to any kind of Confederate person is racially insensitive and culturally inappropriate. This morning, I want to provide you with additional information to support my request. This is a newspaper article that was in a local newspaper dated February 11, 2023, and it's titled "Statue of Dred Scott, Justice Out of..." The bust of Roger Taney, the justice who wrote the notorious 1857 Dred Scott decision ruling African Americans were not citizens, has been removed from the United States Capitol. And Maryland Senators Ben Cardin and Chris Van Hollen, and Maryland Representative Steny Hoyer. The statue will be replaced by a new work honoring Justice Thurgood Marshall, a champion of civil rights. Roger Taney and others who actively helped prolong slavery to find no home within the walls of the U.S. Capitol, Cardin said in the statement. It is fitting that we found Justice Taney, who used his power on the Supreme Court to deny African Americans their most basic legal rights. Holland said, we will see Justice Thurgood Marshall, a Marylander we are proud to celebrate for his trailblazing efforts to advance civil rights and justice for all. September of last year, a federal report made recommendations to rename 2 buildings and 1 street at the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis for individuals with Confederate ties. By the end of the History Committee of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point will rename some buildings currently named after individuals who served in the Confederacy. Finally, there was a news article 2 weeks ago, Tales of Lynching. And though the article was somewhat informative, it fell short of the substantial steps that we need to remove Confederate representation that condoned discriminatory, murderous treatment of black people. And you're allowed to ask yourself, why do the right thing to do? We need to continue this animosity by keeping a name like that in existence. This morning, as you do at all your meetings, you said the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, and you also offer. So this would be the of that street. And I urge you to do so. And we'll be doing it for the citizens of Washington County and Hagerstown. I urge you to make the changes as expeditious as possible. 2 possible names that change the name to is, one would be Jacob Wheaton, who's believed to be the first black man in Hagerstown to vote after the Civil War. Of course, there's William Othello Wilson, who was a black man who earned the Medal of Honor during the Indian Wars, both residents of Hagerstown. So that's all I have. Thank you for your attention. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Any other citizens' participation?
Dan Tedrick, 3 Brennan Drive, Clear Spring, Maryland. I would just like to thank you, Commissioners. I'm an avid motorcyclist and classic car enthusiast. 2 weeks ago, whenever you did not send a letter in to support Senator Quarterman's bill, I really appreciated that, because that you can't, how can anybody judge what's too loud? And I don't think that was the intent of the bill for motorcyclists and classic cars. I think there's another avenue that can go after what he's trying to accomplish. But thank you. And I know you don't get thanked enough.
Thank you.
What you deserve.
Thanks, Dan. Anyone else? Last chance. Okay, with that, we'll move right into, this morning we have a public hearing concerning the potential acquisition of real property. The purpose of this hearing is to hear public testimony concerning this matter. The procedure is as follows. We will first have staff introduce the matter, after which the hearing will be open for public comment and testimony. Each speaker will be given a maximum of 3 minutes to testify. After everyone who wishes to speak has done so, the hearing will close. The commissioners may then discuss the issue and take any action that they deem appropriate, including adoption or rejection of the proposal, or they may take the issue under advisement and deliberate at a later date. Mr. Moser, would you please introduce the matter? Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. This is a public hearing to hear testimony regarding the purchase of a 2.26-acre Sideling Hill Highway Maintenance Facility property, including the Salt Dome located at 2801 National Pike. The property consists of 2.26 acres as well as the Salt Dome. The acquisition cost is $14,029.98. The Sideling Hill National Pike Maintenance Facility is critical to county highway operations. The facility provides covered salt storage, equipment and material storage and staging, and a satellite trailer for employees working in the far western reaches of the county. The Western Highway Maintenance section extends from St. Paul Road west of Hagerstown to Allegheny County. The primary maintenance facility is located in Big Pool, and the Sideling Hill facility shortens what would otherwise be up to a 40-mile, hour-long round-trip journey or longer in inclement weather for material resupply in the Hancock-Sideling Hill area. There is value in having fee-simple ownership and management of the property to allow the county to use and develop the property as it sees fit. The county attempted to acquire the property for $1, however, the purchase price has been rejected. Maryland Department of Transportation Secretary's Office has suggested that it would accept an offer of $14,029.98 to include acquisition, plus interest and administrative costs. Fair market property value has been determined by MDOT to be $98,550. The notice of public hearing and intent to acquire the property was duly advertised on February 7th, February 14th, February 21st, 2023.
Okay.
I'll just add, this is revisiting the item that we presented before to more or less proceed with the offer back to MDOT, and this is the formal presentation and public hearing to move forward with that acquisition.
Okay, we will now open the hearing for public comment. Anyone wishing to testify may come forward. Give us your name and address and tell us what you'd like us to know.
Can I ask one question here
Sure.
at this point?
Yeah.
So the property, there's no residual claim by anybody who had transferred the property to the state?
No, that's correct. We are going through the title work process right now, but no, there's been no claim.
Correct. The state purchased it at fee simple ownership.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, I'm sorry. I needed to close citizens' comment time frame first. So no citizens here to make any thoughts on this. Hearing none, then now I'll open it up to the commissioners.
I appreciate the foresight that the county has put forward and just seeing a need, the travel time, as you mentioned, that's geographically, that's a large swath of land that our highway department has to cover. And we have some roads in that portion of the county that aren't contiguous to other county roads. That means we have to go into either the state of Pennsylvania or Allegheny County and county roads. And so this puts our highway people, I guess, access to salt chemicals they would need to treat the roads much closer to those precarious roads.
Correct.
So
I
thank
think
you.
we brought this up before in looking at the road network. Really, Interstate 70 for a stretch there is the only east-west corridor there in Washington County.
Yeah.
So this
It's
puts a
Interstate
facility
68,
aside.
Interstate 68, west of Hancock. 70 goes northwards into Pennsylvania.
Yeah, but I'm saying,
Yeah.
for them to make that trip, once you get past east of
Okay, I
Hancock,
understand.
40 is the only
I
section.
thought you were
So
mentioning
yes,
going
this-
into those other roads
Yes,
that I mentioned.
you're
Yeah,
correct.
yeah.
It gets very narrow there, and so this way we have a facility on either side
Mm-hmm.
and don't have to make that trip on 70.
Thank you.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, motion second to approve as submitted. All in favor by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign, 5-0. Thank you,
you.
gentlemen.
Thank you.
Okay, next item is general fund budget. Michelle Gordon, good morning.
Michelle Gordon, Chief Financial Officer. Tim Edlin, Director of Budget and Finance. We are here today to present the proposed fiscal year '24 general fund budget. As part of the balancing process, staff met to review submitted expenditures and made $8.6 million in recommended adjustments. The budget is not final until it is formally adopted in May, and it is still able to be changed with a majority vote of the commission after its adoption. Although in some cases, we were not able to fully fund the fiscal year '24 request due to budget constraints, funding in most cases increased over the prior year, and in other cases, funding is higher than state mandated amounts, or it remained flat. Departments should let me know if they would like us to reevaluate any of the decisions made regarding those adjustments. In the coming weeks, we will be hearing from departments, elected officials, and outside agencies regarding their original requested submissions. They will have the opportunity to publicly present justification for their increased requests. The fiscal year '24 proposed budget is balanced at $281,012,330 and is an $18.2 million increase over fiscal year '23's proposed or approved budget of $263 million. I want to direct you to the line item and summary information included in your packet. The first few pages detail proposed revenues or expenditures by line item and compares fiscal year '24 proposed budget to the fiscal year '23 original budget. Your packet also includes summary information to provide you with 10 years of historical data. It outlines the assumptions used in determining the amounts used in the proposed budget. The summary pages also provides you with a higher level of summary information by category, such as tax revenues, charges for services, grants for operations on the revenue side, and for expenditures categories include education, law enforcement, and emergency services. Revenue assumptions maintain the current tax rates for both income tax and real or personal property tax, which are 2.95% for income tax and 92.8 cents per $100 of assessed value for real or personal property. I'll go over some of the economic assumptions used when we look at the 5-year projection. The original requested budget included $281 million in revenues and $290 million in expenditures, leaving an $8.6 million deficit or shortfall. Difficult decisions were made by the Budget and Finance staff and were based on a review of historical spending and trends, potential inflation, mandated funding requirements, and prioritization that was established by the individual departments. For wages and benefits, I wanted to go over some of the expenditure adjustments. For wages and benefits, $2.9 million in requests for new positions or increases in overtime or part-time wages were received. Additionally, wages and benefits included requests of $860,000 for recommended revisions to the salary scale for grades 1 through 12. $3.8 million in requests were received for, and $2.1 million in cuts to wages and benefits were made based on the recommendations of the Salary Committee. Though that information will be presented to you in detail on March the 7th. $2.6 million was included to improve the county's funding status for the pension fund. $520,000 was included to fund the second installment of the fiscal year 23 retiree COLA of 1%, and an additional $520,000 was included for consideration of a 1% COLA for retirees in fiscal year 24 to make up the $3.6 million addition. Board of Ed requested $117 million in funding for fiscal year 24, which was a 7.29% increase, or $8 million. The county typically funds the Board of Ed at maintenance of effort level, which is also the level required by the state. Preliminary maintenance of effort calculations for the Board of Ed require a contribution of $108.1 million from the county. In fiscal year 23, the county approved funding of $109.1 million for the Board of Ed, and staff has recommended to approve the request to be held harmless and maintain funding for fiscal year 24 at $109.1 million. For operating and agency contributions, staff recommended $1.2 million in cuts based on a line-by-line review of historical trends and future sustainability. Capital outlay cuts include $70,000 in computer equipment for the election board that was actually moved to the CIP fund, so it's funded out of that fund. Other reductions of approximately $800,000 were based on affordability and necessity. The expense summary starts on page 10 of your agenda packet or in tab 3 of your binders, and detailed budgets can be found in tab 5 of your binders. Do I have any questions about any of the expenditure adjustments?
Just for the public again, so they understand that these are cuts from the requests, not actual cuts from last year's budget.
That's correct. Wanted to give you some of the expenditure highlights for our budget for fiscal year 24 compared to fiscal year 23. Highlights include $18.2 million in increases. The Board of Ed, as I mentioned earlier, was held harmless at $109.1 million. Wages and benefits include increases of $11.1 million, which includes a 1% COLA and a one step of 2.5% for employees at a cost of about $2.2 million. The salary scale realignment for grades 1 through 12 has an estimated cost of $860,000. The Salary Committee did approve new positions, overtime and part-time wages increases of about $712,000. And of course, we had the mid-year COLA of 9.5%. That was approved in fiscal year 23, and that's carrying forward into fiscal year 24. Operating increases of $1.1 million include amounts for inflation that ranged from 3 to 6% for utilities and supplies, commodities, things like that. I just want to warn you that when we get to water and sewer, landfill, we will see larger increases for some of their expenditures related to chemicals and things like that of 27 to 40%. Public safety operations includes $2 million in increases. $750,000 of that is actually for operating. And then we did include the volunteer fire allocations of $10.6 million in fiscal year 24, which the direct allocation was increased to $115,000 per each fire and rescue station. Capital transfers are included at $6.25 million, which is a $1.4 million increase, and that matches our CIP plan. Additional pension that I mentioned earlier of $3.6 million includes the 1% COLA for retirees in fiscal year 24, carry forward to fiscal year 23, and an additional pension contribution of $2.6 million. To add to that, I want to let you know that the county allocates the largest portion of its annual budget to education, which is $122.8 million, or 44%. Education includes the Board of Ed, HCC, and the libraries. The second largest portion is for public safety at 27%, or $75 million. Public safety includes law enforcement, emergency services, and our fire rescue operations. Do I have any questions about any of the expenditure highlights? I'd like you to turn to page 30 of your packet. Looks a little bit like this. It is the 5-year projection. The 5-year projection is a tool used by management to identify future year issues and allow management to plan for those conditions prior to their arrival. 5-year projection is an educated projection of the county's financial performance over the next 5 years. It's an important document, and it's used by our potential investors when we do our bond issues. Provides us with a tool that can be used to make informed decisions, reduce wasteful spending, and identify potential future issues. Some of the changes that I made to the 5-year projection over what you saw last year, I've included 2 years of historical data. So it includes fiscal year 21 and 22 historical data. For fiscal year 23, it includes the approved budget. I've also included a column in the middle there in tan that provides the estimated actual and a variance to the prior year budget. To look first at the current year estimated actual, real and personal property tax is estimated to end the fiscal year at $140 million, which is an increase of $5.9 million over the approved budget of $134.8 million. It's an increase of 4.4%. Income tax, I did separate out current year withholdings, current year income, prior year withholdings, and the disparity grant, so that we could try to predict what our historical trends are and our income growth will be based on our current year and our prior year basis. So for current year withholdings, I'm estimating that for fiscal year 23, we will end at $94.5 million, which is an increase of about $4.5 million over the original budget. Now, the wild card every year is typically the prior year withholdings. We've had a difficult time during the pandemic predicting what our prior year withholding payments will be. We had a number of late filers. We saw increases in non-wage income. We also saw increases in people filing their tax returns in order to get on the tax rolls and receive some of the stimulus payments. So that's really been difficult to predict in the last couple of years. I am showing that will come in over budget by about $1.7 million. Overall, income tax is expected to come in over budget in fiscal year 23 by $6.2 million, and I predict in fiscal year 24 that the trend will level out. And proposed revenue for fiscal year 24 is $116.4 million, which is an increase of 0.7% over the estimated actual, but it's an increase of 6.4% over the fiscal year 23 budget. Real and personal property tax is expected to increase by 2% in fiscal year 24, and that's based on information provided to us on the assessable base from the Maryland State Department of Assessment and Taxation. If we come down to expenditures for the current fiscal year, you'll see that wages and benefits have increased an average of 7.5%, and that's a result of the mid-year COLA. Predicting that by the end of fiscal year 23, we will have total expenditures of $273 million, which is about $10 million higher than our original budget because of some grants that we received during the year that weren't in the original budget. Pass-through grants for, I believe, rental assistance. So I'm predicting that at the end of fiscal year 23, we'll have about a $12.8 million surplus. Carrying forward into fiscal year 24, total revenues are estimated at $281 million. Total expenditures include amounts for the mid-year COLA, our 6.25 for capital transfers, and we are balanced at $281 million in expenditures. Now, moving forward into fiscal year 25, 26, 27, if you look at real property tax, I've included a 3.5% and 3% increase in real property tax based on historical growth and the unknowns that we have related to the warehouses that are being constructed. I am predicting that in fiscal year 27 and 28, our real estate and personal property tax base will begin to level out and decrease as those unknowns have leveled out, and additionally as our residential market starts to trend back down after the bubble that we've recently experienced. For income tax, I'm showing that for fiscal year '25, we will still continue to see growth of about 4%. And I'm predicting that in fiscal year '26 through '27, based on information that we're receiving from economists, we'll start to see some downturns in our income base. Montgomery County, Baltimore County, they're already starting to see layoffs and job loss, particularly in the science and technology sectors. Although it won't hit us directly, in fiscal year '25, I do predict that we will eventually follow in that downturn of income and potential job loss. Fiscal year '25, I've highlighted that recordation tax. I'm predicting that we should, in fiscal year '25, start returning back to our normal recordation tax amounts. We did hit a high in fiscal year '22 of $17.2 million. Some unknowns that could change that number. All it takes is one retail outlet or a warehouse to transfer, and it could create a variance that is not something that we would predict. It's something that would be an unknown. For operating grants, I've highlighted that in fiscal year '25. We're showing a decrease in fiscal year '24 of $5.6 million down to $2.9 million as the SAFER grant is starting to wind down. We're still showing that in fiscal year '25, we'll have revenue growth of about 2.3%. Now, when we get down to the expenditures, we're showing that our normal growth in wages and benefits will increase by about 3.5%. For fiscal year '25, I'm still showing that we will have inflationary adjustments of about 5% for operating transfers, for courts and internal operations. So overall, our expenditures are expected to increase by 2.8%. So our expenditures are still expected to increase higher than our revenues are for fiscal year '25. So at the bottom, it's showing that we could potentially have a deficit of $1.4 million in fiscal year '25. And I know deficits aren't ideal, but a $1.4 million deficit is something that's manageable. It's something that we could easily correct by managing our expenditures. So we have $1 million in new requests included for personnel positions. We could manage a portion of that $1.4 million deficit by saying that we're not going to approve new requests for positions. We also have vacancy savings of about $1 million. We could also manage that $1.4 million by saying we want to hold positions vacant for 6 to 9 months. So we could potentially be able to increase that vacancy savings from $1 million to $1.4 million. So right there, just in positions, we could manage that $1.4 million potential deficit. Other things that we could do on the operating expenditure side would be to manage discretionary spending for travel, training, and education. We could also defer capital vehicle and equipment replacement in fiscal year '25 to manage that $1.4 million potential deficit. Now, as we get into some of the out years, fiscal year '26, '27, that deficit grows because revenues don't seem to be growing at the same rate as our expenditures. So as the potential for that shift to change, we could potentially need to consider a tax rate increase in either fiscal year '26 or '27. Now, although no increase is in either real estate or income taxes proposed for fiscal year '24, I did mention that increases may be needed in the future. And I just wanted to give you an idea of what the impact would be on the average household. At the end of December, the average home sale price was $308,000. At the current tax rate of 92.8 cents per $100 of assessed value, the average homeowner pays $2,863 a year in real estate tax. If we increase that by just 1 cent to 93.8 cents per $100 of assessed value, the average homeowner would see a $31 annual increase in tax expense. At the end of 2021, the average net taxable income was $66,000. At our current tax rate of 2.95%, the average household is paying $1,948 in income tax. If we were to increase that to 3%, the average homeowner would see a $33 increase in their annual income tax payments. And each of those revenue increases, although they only have about a $31 impact on the average household, they have a very different impact on the actual revenue that we would actually see. For real and personal property tax, we would see an immediate impact. If we were to increase the tax rate, we would see about, by just that 1 penny, we would see about $1.6 million in increased revenue in the first year, and that would increase by the normal inflationary amounts to 1.7 and 1.8 million in over a 3-year period. Income tax, because that rate is not effective until January the 1st of each year, if we were to increase that tax rate during the first year that we increased it, we would only get about a half a year's benefit of that increase. So we would only see about a $750,000 increase in revenue as a result of an income tax increase during the first year. We would not see any increases in the disparity grant until the second year of that tax rate implementation. We would also see a full year of the income tax increase. So we could predict that revenue would increase by 2.9 million versus 1.7 million for real or personal property. And then by the third year of that income tax increase, we would still have that full year of increase for the tax rate, but our disparity grant would increase one more time, much the same way that we saw it increase the last time that we increased our tax rate. So we would get a bigger bang for that same $30. We would get more money from the state by increasing the income tax rate versus the real or personal property tax rate. I just wanted to explain how that works so that we have an idea. The fiscal year 24 budget will not be formally adopted until May of this year. We will be bringing you detailed information regarding the personnel requests on March the 7th and draft 2 of the CIP plan to you on March the 21st. There are no major changes, just a few tweaks, and I just wanted to keep you updated on it. We have upcoming luncheons today with the Library Board and in the future with the Commission on Aging, HCC, and the Fine Arts Museum. Important dates that the public needs to be aware of include April the 25th, which is the public hearing on rate changes, if any, May the 9th, which is the public hearing at the Kepler Theater, May the 16th for adoption of the budget. And lastly, I just wanted to extend thanks to the Budget and Finance staff for reviewing submissions for the budget document, and special recognition should be given to Deborah Dickey and Kim Edlin for the time and effort that they put in on evenings, weekends, and holidays to make sure requests were reviewed, make sure requests are complete, and they compiled the budget document for you. At this time, I'll take any questions, comments, or requests for additional information.
Thank you, Michelle. That was very good work, as usual. Greatly appreciated. This is a general comment, and for the other commissioners, this is my first time through the county budget process, and I'm just wondering if, when we look at how we're going about this, if we could look at maybe thinking about doing it slightly differently next year, because I would like to have the benefit, and I think the staff for the county, especially your staff, Michelle, could benefit from us hearing from the county library, the county school board, all of those entities before we get to a process where we're sort of laying it out publicly with your budget. You would get the benefit of discussions with us, the questions from us that would inform how you're deciding to make some of these cuts on your own before it's being rolled out publicly as the first draft of the proposed budget. Because I know I have a lot of questions. I got lots of tabs in this big, thick binder of yours. And some of those are things you have in there are placeholders that you expect that we're going to. So I would just like us to maybe think about that, County Administrator and President Barr, that if we could maybe next year front load the briefings from the library and others, it might be helpful for the staff as well as for us to get our concerns where we're seeing a product.
Yeah, no, I'll just say that some of these same discussions about, obviously we're into this process now, but even talking about what the process would look like moving forward, because you're correct. I mean, from a staff, we're looking at the requests, actually budget and finance staff are looking at the requests and trying to come and present a balanced budget to you from a general fund perspective. And one way to do that is to, have additional jobs to do it within a few periods, to allow, you all to hear from the outside agencies, from our own county staff, and to give direction to the staff. So I would say from my perspective, I would love to have this, some thoughts about where you want to go with this. And we'll have those discussions now, but I agree with you, and Michelle and I just had that discussion some time talking about, what that may look like moving forward, and I know she has some ideas.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great idea, and if the consensus of the commission is next year to move forward with more of a budget workshop type presentation so that we can hear some requests prior to actually making adjustments and get your feedback, I have no problem with that. What I would envision, though, would be that those budget workshops would need to take place. Staff does need time to make adjustments and get that all done before we're recording the rate, and that needs to be done by the end of April at the latest.
Michelle, I think this was really nice, very informative, and I would like to see, it sounds like a little bit, and no reflection to you by any means, a little cart before the horse. You have a tentative balance you just presented, correct? And if I want to change, and the commissioners agree, a dollar amount somewhere, whether it be any organization, that money, then it'd be nice to be able to discuss that before we got to this point, maybe. So I think that's the same thing you're saying, aren't you?
Yes, sir.
And like if all of a sudden we one day had $2 million to some organization, I see your projections. It's not real uplifting in 26, 27, 20. Where would that money come from this year? If it would reflect down the road, I know that, but where would that money come from?
This year, any changes that you would have as far as pension fund or contribution, we have $2.6 million included as an additional contribution to our pension fund.
And so that would be as drastic as we will have to get, because that, to me, that's not a good idea to put, but that's an example. I understand what you're saying. So you wouldn't want to put less in a pension fund to fund something else. So those are the collateral damage you cause.
Correct.
Well,
okay, that's what I was sort of curious about.
Correct.
And Randy, we do have things like, 14 or so new fire officials in their new hires budgeted for, I believe. 8 new firemen and
They weren't
4.
approved by the salary committee.
Oh, okay.
But you're right, if we wanted to consider those in public before the salary committee made its recommendations.
But those are the types of hard choices we would make.
Those are the hard choices.
And then I think you've got a real good job on the assumptions, okay? I think you're very middle of the road on those, because some prognosticators are suggesting that we could hit a deeper recession, which could have greater implications. So, but we have to have a plan. You've got a very well thought out plan. And then when we engage reality, we have the plan to pivot from. And that's very good. Thank you.
Just a few comments that I have, too. One, I know I was not a commissioner. I don't think any of us were, but our staff were employees during the Great Recession of a little over a decade ago. And I believe the county was able to weather that storm. Kim, I think you were a big part of that. Thank you. Without a tax increase. So hopefully the recession that we're headed into, which I think we all agree we are headed into a recession, won't be that severe. But I think we've done it before. I think we can do it again. A question about the Board of Ed and maintenance of effort. I appreciate, I agree with the premise of hold harmless. I don't think we should reduce their funding. But Michelle, can you talk a little bit about last year we provided more than maintenance of effort? And so I'm assuming that goes into, you said 108.1 million was our MOE requirement, is that correct? And 109.1 million is what you're recommending we fund the Board of Ed at. Why is our maintenance of effort 108.1 less than what we provided as an allocation last year? Is it because student population has declined? I thought our maintenance of effort, we can never go below that per pupil funding.
Last year's amount that we provided was $2.2 million in excess of the actual required maintenance of effort. So we gave them extra funding last year. This year's maintenance of effort, their number of pupils, when I checked on the state's website, only increased by about 111, or was estimated to increase by 111 pupils. So because their population, their student population is flat, although maintenance of effort has increased over the prior year, it has not increased more than what we actually contributed last year.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And on the school board's budget, I think they're asking for like 117?
Correct.
Okay. And we did give a very good COLA to our employees, and I would anticipate that at least part of their workforce they would want to give a COLA to, of some amount, teachers, maintenance workers, janitors, because they're the frontline workers, in my view. Any input on that from them? It's in the budget. What were they asking for that in the budget or not?
I'm sure they are. They did not detail that specific amount that they're asking for their employees in the budget. That's a question we can ask of them and follow up. I know they receive a considerable portion of revenue from the state as well.
Yeah.
And the state is, as part of the new blueprinting model, is trying to shift some of their funding on to the county. So I do anticipate in the year fiscal year 2030, our maintenance of effort will start to increase exponentially as it relates to the Board of Ed. So we typically see $1.5 to $2.5 million annual increases. By 2030, that increase will be more like $3 to $6 million instead of just the normal, $2 million increase. But I can follow up with them. I'm sure they'll include it in their presentation, but I'll also follow up with them.
So just let me follow up on that. So they will be here next week to make their budget presentation, so I think they will provide that to you. I believe in my discussions with the superintendent, you are correct. In their proposal, their 117 it did include an amount for salary increases for support personnel. I don't believe it reached the level of the COLA that employees receive, but it's a significant amount. And I did talk to the superintendent yesterday, and he reiterated that to me. That was part of their proposal, because they're facing the same issues that the county has been facing. So I think next week that they're going to add you have specific to that significant increase for their employees.
Michelle, in years past, we were given a really sheet that looked at Washington County government, Washington County Board of Ed. I looked at, I'm going to the salaries here, if that sounds familiar. I think it looked at Frederick County, Maryland, maybe Frederick County Board of Ed. I'm not sure of our other peer entities, but it started in the year 2000, like a baseline $30,000 a year salary, and then looking at the COLA adjustments, the pay increases throughout the year, over the years, what that would amount to today, looking back at a $30,000 a year salary. If you could update that for us, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, maybe I understand something. I'm not trying to be mean here, but I don't know why our wages should be compared to Board of Education wages. I mean, we suffered a pretty big disparity here on wages. I don't know what theirs is, but and I'm sure they're suffering disparity too. But their upper echelon, I mean, what our echelon is making, and then our mid-range salaries might be very comparable already. Comparing us with them, with that I'm trying to keep up with the Joneses or vice versa.
Well, and we also had didn't receive a COLA or a step increase, and I'm not so sure they followed that same model. So I don't have that history, but I don't believe that they went as many years without increases as our employees did.
That's what I'm curious to see with that chart. Just looking to see, kind of to Randy's comment there, there were a period of time where we were far behind Washington County government COLA and step increases. some of our peers, and I'm wondering, have we caught up now? Are we still behind? Did we exceed?
We could
in
get
some
that
area?
information for you.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I tried to say.
Yeah, and I agree. I will say from a county government perspective, we don't make that comparison. That's made by others, but we don't make that comparison because I don't think it's a good comparison. So I agree with you. We don't do that. It is made by others.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next item is 2024 General Fund Budget, Public Safety, Law Enforcement, and Emergency Services. Sheriff?
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
Brian Albert, Sheriff, Washington County, and we're here to present, hopefully you received this document here. We went over, after Michelle's group, they did a great job with the total overall budget, and what I did is went through and removed the COLAs, the stuff that we just requested on our increases throughout judicial, patrol, detention, they're our big central booking. So our increases totaled $1 million out of a $44 million budget, and that gave you an increase of 2.4% overall. So I just I'm not going to read to you exactly what was cut. If you have any questions, we do have some reductions. The Narcotics Task Force was reduced a little bit by $18,000. Day Reporting Center, we had a decrease in some of the testing. I think we have some grants that we received there. And I will open it up to any questions, or if Colonel Lodge has anything to add.
I guess I'm more curious about, you just said you'd reduced the budget on the drug task force. How did you get away with that when we? I'm not wanting to give you more money for it, Brian,
No.
but I mean, just curious.
I'm looking here to see.
I mean, that's a big deal, right?
It was a decrease in lab services for the crime lab and software cost. We had some duplications there. So we reduced the overall budget in those areas $56,000. So it had an overall impact of 18,700 reduction.
So, Brian,
Yes, sir.
I almost think you're being too frugal. I have serious concerns about public safety. I'm worried about the troop to task analysis that might underpin your budget. Do we really have enough in the counter drug task force? People, investigators, you know, given you may lose some partners. I don't know where that stands. And then overall public safety, with the growth of the county, the increase in crime that we see in certain areas, the growth in drugs, human trafficking. We had 8 murders last year. You could go down the list of the statistics, and the trends are not in a good direction, unfortunately. So my question is, do you have what is required? Because I would think you might need more patrol officers. I might be more comfortable with more patrol officers.
Well, Commissioner Harvey, we did increase 2 on the patrol side, 2 on detention. Then we added an IT person for the detention side of things. You know, being a recently elected sheriff and coming in, I had a baseline here to work off of, and you know, we worked tirelessly to get this done. You know, from December 15th when I was sworn in until probably this first week of January. So I think those things are probably requests that will come forward, but I think initially just getting my feet on the ground with being in a new position, you know, we felt the increases that were modest, but we felt they were appropriate at this time.
Commissioner, if I may add, retention and recruitment is one of our biggest obstacles we have. Thanks for the commissioners. Retention has calmed down. We're not losing guys like we were. Their pay is competitive, it's competitive to other agencies, so we're pretty good there. We actually have 2 openings in patrol right now that are opening, that we need to get applicants for the next academy. We have 4 retirements that are coming in, so we need to get those in. But retention has improved, so now, since we're not losing people, we can put more effort into this recruitment and build our staff to where we want to be. And to add those 2, from the bottom line is going to be huge for us for what we can do with them. So we're working on it. We've got a long way to go.
So you're very comfortable of where you're at right now to be able to handle Washington County, I guess. It sounds like it.
We are, but as duties increase, as requests increase.
So is a wish list, would it be more sworn officers if you could get them? Would that be on your main thing on your wish list?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it takes to be able to recruit those people to fill those spots too, and they're not knocking down our doors to do this job.
Yeah, again, not that I want to spend more money, but I mean, we need it's really important to me. How would you recruit more? Have you ever thought about sign-on bonuses or things like that?
You guys have authorized sign-on bonuses, so we do have those. We do have those.
Yeah. I mean, what size though?
It's $5,000, 25 when you accept the employment, 25 once you get out of the academy. So,
did that help, or would it take more eventually?
Every agency now has sign-on bonuses. When we first did it, we were one of the first ones that kind of did it. Now everyone, Montgomery County has a $20,000 sign-on bonus for the laterals. Yeah, they just announced it.
It's a statewide and nationwide. This is the focus of conversation at every Maryland Sheriff's Association recruitment and retention. How do we get people? The state police are experiencing it. I think it was just that negative media, national media. I don't think that we don't live that here in Washington County. For the most part, the community support the police, and it's just trying to have that negative impact and get people interested in this career field again. I give example when I took the test in '91 to become a natural resource officer, there was 1,600 people for 10 spots. Now they're still, we just talked to someone in natural resource police today. They had 500 applicants for about 15 spots. So, that it's something we have to look at, how we're recruiting and where we're recruiting, and how we get those people here in the county. I'm a big community guy. I want people engaged in this community, live here, work here, play here. That's kind of that's a hurdle. We have a lot of deputies that live in Pennsylvania, West Virginia. Not a lot, but I don't know what the number is, maybe 15%. But, we want them to live here, work here. So it's some things, it's very, infantile in my term as sheriff. I think you're gonna see those asked, Commissioner Harvey. Those things will come forward, but, the initial impact, I think I was sworn in on the 15th here in this room, and we were working on the budget the next day. So, we didn't have a lot of time to digest and say, hey, this is what we wanted to get the budget done and get it into the budget and finance so they could complete their study.
And by the time you get somebody, it takes about a year to get them on the street?
It's about a year.
About a year.
Yeah, so I'll just say that, obviously, these are important questions. We're going to continue to have them, so I think we'll have them as the years go forward. As Colonel said, we, a few years ago when we started having some of these serious discussions about recruitment and retention, they identified that, this board identified that, and we've had a couple different rounds of trying to help with that, and I think it sounds like it's been successful in doing that, so we have to continue to build on that. So, obviously, as we talked about, retaining the people that we had, because we were losing them, and so that's been helpful, and recruiting, and not just that, but as part of the retention was to work on the different steps and all those things that we have in there. So this board obviously made a commitment to that, and will continue to do that. So as we look to the future and future positions, the number of positions is obviously very important, so we'll have that discussion, but,
Yeah,
you know, I think where we were 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, we've made a lot of progress, and we want to continue to build on that.
And we have.
we're in a very competitive place right now with pay and benefits. You know, one of my concerns is detention, recruitment there. We have 5 openings there right now, and we're gonna put on a pretty big push for recruitment. We're competitive with the state starting salary. Our retirement's a little bit better. We have to sell that to the new people coming in the door, so.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen.
Colonel Pete Lozich, congratulations on your new role. I think that's, this is your first time sitting before us with your new hat. So congratulations. And Sheriff, I would just say, you talked a little bit about being new in the role, and I think personally what I plan to do is give you a lot of deference. You were elected by the people and entrusted by the people, and, you know, you'll proceed how you think is best. I think when it comes to the budget, it's an important department. I think I saw Colonel Lozich shaking his head. There's been a lot of strides that's been made in recent years, but, you know, you're in that role. Take the time to decide for yourself what you think needs done. You were entrusted to do that, so.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks again. Next item is intergovernmental cooperative purchase.
We have
Oh,
Dave,
I'm
Dave's
sorry.
making his presentation.
Okay. I wondered why there was so much.
It was put in
I'm
there
sorry.
together, but.
Sorry, Dave. I was trying to jump ahead on you.
I thought I was gonna get off easy. Good morning, David Hayes, Director of Emergency Services.
Dale Fishak, President of Volunteer Fire and Rescue Association.
So I'm not sure I'll be quite as brief as Sheriff, but I'll try to get close to that. So for the Division of Emergency Services Public Safety budget, which also includes a large part of the volunteer fire and rescue community's funding, our overall proposed budget is $30,758,610. Of that, $6,610,090 go directly to the operations of the Emergency Communications Center. $5,500 go directly to the WCVFRA member companies. $6.9 million covers the full-time firefighters in the volunteer stations. $547,000 is part-time wages for the volunteer fire stations, and $2.2 million is the EMS wages that also work in the fire station. And then $161,000 covers EMS equipment service contracts. $310,450 is EMS medical supplies, and $122,700 is ladder pump and hose testing for the volunteer fire departments. And then $311,000 is the volunteer personal protective equipment, which is firefighter turnout gear. And then we have $223,000 for the equipment for the reserve fleet when it arrives. And I'll go back to some of the requested increases real quick, but I just wanted to break this out so there was clarity, because our department is a little bit different than most other departments, because we fund a significant part of our budget to the volunteer fire and rescue community. And of those numbers I just gave you, $28 million plus goes directly into support of the volunteer fire and rescue services relative to field service, fire and EMS staffing, equipment, and their needs. And then the division itself is directly supported by about $2.5 million, which includes facilities, the salaries for the DES staff. And then about $1 million of that, 2.4, is actually the capital request that you see in your budget. Going through each of the budgets, on page 8.3 is the air unit. That's budget 11,420. That budget is requested at $113,480. That is the bulk of that is in capital and controlled asset request. 38,000 of that is for new air cylinders for fill stations. 25,000 is a placeholder request for some building modifications. That building has not had significant modifications the last years, and they've got a good group going. They're doing a lot of duty hours, so we're trying to make some moderate improvements to the facility as far as the human capital needs. Our special operations, which is our technical rescue group, their budget is on page 8-9. That represents $515,530. The operating expense has increased by $132,910, but I want to point out that $128,480 of that is for specialized training that requires travel to Texas for structural collapse, and that is to try to prepare ourselves to deal with a potential rescue or something that we could have with these large concrete tilt slab structures for the warehousing industry. That would be 20 people. I know it's an expensive class, but we don't have the training. And then there's some equipment requests here also to help us deal with those types of emergencies that we're faced with the evolution of these large commercial warehousing. The big items in that are capital and control, $55,000 for additional water rescue gear, which is PFDs, wetsuits, dry suits, and helmets for the expansion of the boat fleet and to upgrade some end-of-life equipment there. There's a $160,000 capital controlled asset request to upgrade the hydraulic extrication tools on our rescue squads. Most of that equipment is now in excess of 20 years. That's the equipment that we use for vehicle crashes. There's technical extrications where most may know that as the Hirsch jaws of life. And then there's $23,878 to upgrade some of the additional hazmat equipment, the meters, a propane flare torch. We had a propane truck rollover last year, and that was about a 3-day event. What we're looking on. That's all in the page 8-9. It's in the special operations budget. Well, it'll be in that tab. So our next budget is 11,440, which is 911 communication. That starts on page 8-21. The operating expenses increased by $334,000 or 5.33%. $413,770 as for wages, and some of that money is offset by about a $37,920 decrease in the operating expenses. And the bulk of that was from software that was a one-time upgrade in the FY23 budget. EMS operations begins on page 8-32. That budget is $3.9 million. The operating expenses increased by $1,175,550, and that has the $1 million placeholder for a potential EMS transition. The remaining increases for contractual service, software, and medical supplies. Capital and controlled assets in that budget are $95,150. That includes replacement of 8 AEDs, pediatric EMS bags, 3 CPR devices, which are the mechanical CPR devices, and then we're trying to move over to an electronic narcotics tracking system. So that's the money that's there. Fire operations begins on page 8-48. It's 11,525. That represents $7.8 million. Large part of that is for wages and benefits. They increased $2.1 million. I did want to mention that request includes 8 firefighters and 4 battalion chiefs. If that was to be moved forward, our position would be we should consider a SAFER grant application again, much as we did in 2020. The problem with part of that request is the SAFER grant closes March 17th. So that's the date we have to apply for that if the commissioners were going to enact any kind of firefighter staffing, and you wanted us to go through that. On the positive side of that conversation, I have already updated a significant part of that application, and we could meet that March 17th deadline. SAFER grant by hiring 12 firefighters, and then we promote the battalion chiefs from internals. Only cover the part for the battalion chiefs, which will be the difference between the FAO salary and what will be a supervisor's cost, which is about 16% per position, so that would be 16. Capital assets are $187,440. Large part of that is for the equipment for the reserve fleet. I did want to mention that we missed this in budgeting, but if the battalion chiefs were to move forward, we would need 1 vehicle at a cost of about $70,000. That is not included in the budget presentation. Public Safety Training Center begins on page 8-65. That budget is $927,910. Wages and benefits did increase by $480. That has a lead paramedic instructor, so we're trying to become a little bit more self-supportive. having some ongoing problems with the state training agency, where we're getting classes canceled consistently because of lack of instructors. So, and we have the instructor availability, 60 and 80-hour class. So operating expenses increased minimally, $35,000, and then there's a small controlled capital asset is $4,330, and that's for the PPE or the firefighter turnout gear, if that lead instructor position. And then volunteer services is our largest budget, 8-77. The wages in there decreased $2,300. Operating expenses increased by $640, and that is a direct result of a proposal to increase the general allocations from $100,000. I thought I had it at 105, but it sounds like Budget Finance may have made that even a little bit more generous to 115, but that is $22,410 of that increase. We've also proposed increasing the fundraising incentive from what is now 15% to a 25% match for the fundraising dollars, and increasing the cap on that from $30,000 to $40,000. The capital controlled asset request through the association itself, $171,000, and that represents one pick and two. And I'll let Dale add any comments if he wants to the volunteer services part or anything else, and then we'll take your questions.
I just want to add, I did not increase the volunteer contribution. I thought I saw 115, so maybe I have a typo. It's 105, if that's what it is.
Should be 105.
It's 105. That was incorrect in my presentation.
I don't really have anything to add. He pretty much covered it and summarized it. I guess we land on the questions.
I guess I want to go right to the, I heard Michelle say in the summary when Commissioner Harvey asked, you had proposed 8 firefighters and 4 battalion chiefs, is that what it was?
Correct.
And right now we have paid firefighters in stations. What would would we put more and more stations or supplement the ones we have in the stations?
So it would be both. One is our current firefighters, when we hired the SAFER grant, we hired that grant slim. We did not overhire, so they're now accruing more vacation and they have more leave time. So we're having some difficulty covering those shifts without enormous amounts of overtime. And then we currently are sitting on 3 letters from volunteer fire stations asking for consideration for more staffing help. So,
Well, then have you figured out the expense of a 1 firefighter or 2 or 3 or 4 compared to what the overtime is costing the county?
I did not work that number out, but I can certainly.
It'd be sort of be nice to know that, because maybe we're spending, well, it's always cheaper, I think, with overtime because of benefits and all that. But just with how much difference there is. And then why the 4 battalion chiefs?
So that's a double conversation. One is we're talking about an EMS transition here. We currently we're authorized for 55 firefighters. Now, not all 55 work every day, but we don't have any 24-hour supervision that's transient that can move from station to station to station. The only supervision we have is at each station. We have a number of firefighters that work at the volunteer stations in a part-time capacity, so we don't have that supervision that's readily available for us. And then the big one is we had an unfortunate event on June 29th of 2021. We had a firefighter critically injured. And I think Dale would echo this. I know it was in both the Carter Lanes report and its strategies and recommendations that the county needs dedicated field supervision, both in the incident command role and in the safety officer role. Now, I want to make sure I'm clear that it doesn't mean that we have to have dedicated supervisors that have to be in charge every day. But we have to make sure that we have credentialed and certified people available so that in the absence of a volunteer officer that meets those credentialing, that person will be able to step in and either fill the incident commander's role or support the incident commander because they're complex, or on the third side of that, that they could serve as a safety officer if we didn't get a safety officer.
So what's more important? Is it the battalion chiefs or the paid firefighters right now?
That's a tough question, but I tell you, we have to have supervision. We're at the point we need supervision.
So what would hypothetically 3 firefighters and 2 battalion chiefs do?
It's a start. It doesn't let us put as big a swing at this. The 3 firefighters likely would be used as relief, meaning they would cover the vacations, the Kelly day that comes in at 24 Kelly, or 24, 48 Kelly shift. And then we would use them in other stations when they were not filling in for their.
And if I understood correctly, none of that's in your budget, right?
That is in our, well, it was in our budget, but I believe it's been.
It's not in the tentative budget presented. And then one more question, I heard you say something about the stipends or for the volunteers. Is that in there that we can give them more money?
It's in there, increasing them from 100 to 105,000, not to 115,000.
Gotcha.
And the reason I put that in there was at some direction of previous commissioners saying, look, let's try to increase that dollar amount, that general allocation, to keep up with the cost of inflation. Because if you remember last year, I don't think we had raised that for about 13 years, which is one of the reasons the commissioners took a pretty big swing at that and moved it as far as what they did. So our goal was to move that incrementally every year to try to recognize the work that they do.
Wasn't there a limit, wasn't there, Dale? Was it 5,000 to cap for answering calls, right?
I don't think we put a cap on the amount of money for answering calls.
You're talking about the paper?
The $10 a call.
Yeah, so there is no cap. The cap is actually through the Federal Fair Labor Standards laws, that a volunteer is still declared a volunteer as long as they do not exceed 20% of the threshold or like costs for somebody that did the same job. So the number we used when we proposed that was $80,000. We knew we could go to $17,500 in stipend before they would have the volunteer status placed in jeopardy.
So is the volunteers being rewarded somehow in this budget?
Yes, go ahead.
Because of the 105?
We're using the same matrix and same system that they exist today. So they are being rewarded. And actually, there's proposed increase for the fundraising incentive, matching it at a higher rate than is currently matched now. So that directly goes to the companies, which is based on the efforts of the volunteers doing their fundraising efforts, chicken barbecues, carnivals, et cetera.
Right.
Can you help me a little bit with those comments? I was thinking of when we're talking about the 105,000, we're talking about just the general allocation to the companies, but that's separate from the stipends or the benefits that we're giving to the volunteers, right?
Right. So there's company funding, company level funding, and then there's funding that we now provide directly to the volunteers through either incentives or that pay per call. The company level funding breaks down generically with what is currently in the FY23 budget, $100,000 a year to each station. And then we incentivize their fundraising efforts by 15%.
That's additional funding.
Additional funding. And that has a cap of $30,000. There are only 2 stations that have maxed that $30,000 out, even in the current. But when we took it to a recommendation of 25%, I thought we probably need to increase that cap because there may be another couple companies that would max out at that $30,000. And it's still, in my opinion, a good deal. 25 cents on the dollar is a good deal for the county and the volunteer companies. So the more we can incentivize them, everything we're trying to do is a double-sided approach. One is we're trying to put career staff in where it's needed to augment the volunteers to make sure we have a sustainable response force. But the backside, we're also trying to at least stabilize, if not improve, the volunteer workforce where we can. I've said this before, I'll say it here again today. I've been doing this for more than a day or two. I do not believe we can return to the days of the 70s and 80s volunteer workforce as far as numbers, how many hours they have to give us. They just don't have mostly those types of hours.
Can I ask a question? Dave, Dale, I would like, not here, but I'd like to get more of a drill down on the command and control operations that you believe are, lays out where you're at today in managing the operations across these departments. We have Smithsburg, that's all volunteer. Are we, what's your thinking? I don't need an answer right now. What's your thinking about how you backfill that? Or does Smithsburg have internal capabilities to make sure you've got the right credentialed people there, and they're managing that. And how does that work? I have done this very work, not in fire, but in military operations where we have to have medevac, we have to have transportation, leadership, certain credentialed people to do certain specialized things in diversified, distributed operations across the whole Middle East for about 900 people. So it's 24/7, and you have to be ready to go at any time. It's a different construct than yours, but I would like to get a drill down on how you actually think you need to manage this, because you're anticipating going forward with increased professionalization, if you will. Not that the volunteers aren't professional, but paid, I think is probably the word. And I think you're trying to set conditions for that. I'd like to understand what your thinking is on that too, because I think you're incrementally trying to build pieces here. And, okay.
Can you talk a little bit about, obviously, we've done a SAFER grant before, but what you're anticipating, if we applied for a SAFER grant, what funding we would look for, what the timing of that would be? Because, I mean, obviously, you submitted those, the salary committee looked at that, trying to find a way to fund that, and I think the commissioners are talking about some, whether there's a compromise there or not, but if there's a SAFER grant opportunity, I mean, I'd like to know your thoughts about what that is. I hadn't heard that.
So the SAFER grant is a federally funded program, and we were the recipient of that right in front of, or right on top of COVID. So originally, the funding formula for that, it's for 3 years. When you submit, they normally award in the fall of the year of submittal. So we would, if we were to submit, we'd submit by March 17th, we'll likely hear something September, October of this current year. And they either are going to award the SAFER grant or they're not. So it's not like they normally don't cut it if it's what you request. Right. But the funding formula is the first 2 years are funded at 60% of salary and benefits for what they call entry-level firefighters, which mean are fire truck riding people. And then the third year they fund 35%, and then the fourth year they're ours. They belong to us. Depending on if you were going to do something, and I'm just going to use the 12 number for now, I would propose if you're going to authorize a battalion chiefs and the firefighters, we hire 12 firefighters through the SAFER grant, which would qualify, because you can't hire the battalion chiefs out of the SAFER grant. And we hire all 12 firefighters out of the SAFER grant, maximize the federal dollars, promote the battalion chiefs from current full-time staffing, which would create the vacancies for those 4 additional firefighters above the 8. The net effect at the end of the day, when it all materializes, is 8 new firefighters, 4 battalion chiefs. If you weren't going to do that, then we would just cut those numbers down to whatever you were to allow us to move forward. The narrative is normally written on how do we march towards meeting NFPA 1910 or 1920 with 3 or 4 firefighters on the fire apparatus responding. They typically don't like narratives that say you're going to put a single driver-only person in a firehouse, and depend on the volunteers to show up for that. Not that they don't, but that's not normally where their funding algorithms drive to. The grant that we wrote that was successful, we wrote twice. We've gone for that grant twice. The first one, we did not write it to where we had a structured plan, I think to where you're at, where we showed how we were going to put pockets of firefighters throughout the county and augment not just the primary station, but the stations around them. And we did that with the first SAFER grant. We have 3 firefighters in 4 stations around the county, full-time firefighters, that we use as a regional response concept. But the other departments have now stepped up and said, look, we're struggling. We anticipate the same struggles that some of these other departments are having, and have asked for additional help from the division. We are using a part-time staffing algorithm right now to the fullest extent we can, but it's like anything else. A lot of these part-time folks work other jobs. They don't want to work the weekends, and it's hard to begrudge that. So we're not able to fill the weekends to the levels that we would like to be able to do, and that's also a time when the volunteers want to have some free time, especially those that might work Monday through Friday. So I don't know if I answered that well enough. But.
Dave, if I could ask a question, I'm looking at page 8.2. In bold at the top, fire operations, it says there is a possible option to renew the SAFER grant. So when you say renew, you're not talking about a SAFER grant that's renewing the one we received for the 29 firefighters.
That's a poor choice on my part as far as what I wrote there. It wouldn't be renewed.
I was hopeful there. Okay.
Resubmit for a new SAFER grant.
And it says deadline is March 17th. What kind of lead time would you need if the commissioners decided to go that route? What kind of lead time would you need to get a grant application?
So I have the grant application in hand. I've already updated probably 70% of it. It really is statistics and dollar figures I need to get into it. I've already upgraded the narrative. Now that could change if we don't, that narrative's built on 8 firefighters. But if that number changes, I would have to modify it. But I think I can make it as long as we get something here in the next, maybe next week. Probably need to know by next Tuesday to give me enough time to get it massaged out, get it up through John's office, make sure that he's okay with it, work with budget and finance, to make sure that they're.
So
okay
if that was approved, Dave, could it be, how would it affect your budget if it was contingent upon receiving the grant? So we might not know until the fall, like you said, that we would receive it. If we don't receive the grant, we don't go down that path this year. Is that a possibility?
Yep, and that's what we did the first year. We didn't get the grant, so we didn't hire the firefighters the first year. So that's what we did, which is certainly an option we can do. If we get the grant, we hire the firefighters. If we don't, we either hire some firefighters or we don't hire any. That would be a commissioner's decision. Our goal would be to do everything we can to land the safer grant.
Is there a minimum, safer grant, did you say you had to do 12, or did I hear you say that?
I think you could.
So you want 8 and 4. With the safer grant, how do you, here's what worries me a little bit about safer grant. I know how the breakdown is over the years. Well, Michelle's just telling us we have 3 years from now, or 4 years, maybe $5 to $10 million deficit. Well, then we really got to start paying 100% of wages and benefits. So you got to think about that a little bit when it all hits at once. So that 10 million goes to 12 million. So could you just, would it be, could you do 6 firefighters how could you get, just hypothetically, 6 firefighters and 2 battalion chiefs? Or would that wouldn't be very smart. Never mind that remark.
If we did the 2 battalion chiefs, we've already had this conversation because, we've tried to forecast questions, to be honest with you. We would work them day shifts to get 7-day-a-week coverage, and then we try to depend on the volunteers for the evenings and night. With 2 wouldn't let us do 24-hour coverage. You need 4 to do 24-hour coverage.
Well, the smart way would be let Safer Grant pay for them, a part of them for 2 or 3 years, but then the whole thing falls on us in the 4th year.
Eventually, you're gonna own the salaries. There's no question about that. Safer Grant is just a deferral to the point that you actually own the financial cause of it.
Okay. So one more question, I'm gonna let you learn. How does the battalion chiefs work into this? Are they considered Safer Grant too as firefighters?
So the battalion chiefs themselves would not. The supervisors are not eligible in the Safer Grant.
Promote within and then fill with?
We would hire 12 firefighters, promote 4 battalion chiefs.
Gotcha.
And the 12 firefighters would be new positions, so they're eligible for the Safer Grant. The Safer Grant has to be new positions. You can't offset the current positions you already got.
And looking at this in isolation is one thing, then looking at, I think Brian Albert was extremely conservative about what his future needs are going to be, and I anticipate he will be coming back with additional requirements down the road, and I think there's going to be other areas too. So we're going to have some challenges, especially if Michelle's forecasts are correct.
Okay, any other comments?
I'll just say, I believe, Michelle, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think next week, on next week's agenda, you mentioned we're gonna be bringing in all the personnel requests. So you'll get a chance to see all the personnel requests, including these. So there is a place on the agenda next week already to talk about personnel requests overall, and if you want to have further discussions about this, because it sounds like, if we're gonna go down the path of a Safer Grant, we're gonna have to make that decision.
Yeah, and what I'll do, again, no commitment, but I'll keep working on the grant to make sure I'm as far down the road as I can be. And it's not bad work, because eventually I'm probably gonna apply for a Safer Grant again, whether it's this year or next year. So I'm just keeping the document alive.
Yeah, and I think it is a good question. Commissioner Wagner asked about comparing overtime. Obviously we have overtime, and then we have new positions. So, I know you're proposing 8 firefighters and 4 battalion chiefs, but if there was a compromise of some sort, how that would work relating to overtime and all that, I know that may be a lot of work, but you look at those numbers to see just financially how it works. I mean, maybe you all know, maybe Budget and Finance knows or has some idea, but I think this board needs to know that to try to make those decisions.
To give you a real quick, thanks to Sonia here real quick, and I need to do a couple thank yous before we dismiss real quick. But our current overtime budget is budgeted at $225,000, and we are already encumbered at $357,000, so we're $132,000 year-to-date over in our projected
Already.
overtime.
Already
So
in
that's
February.
probably on pace to come in at $500,000 in overtime.
There comes a point when could be cheaper to hire somebody.
Well, there's two things to both of that. There is a max threshold for overtime relative to the human person. At some point, you work the people too hard, and it's beyond what's reasonable. So, I don't want to be to that point, because then we get into fatigue issues. But then the second side of it is overtime is either mandatory or voluntary, and nobody likes mandatories, right? So when you get to that max threshold where people have had their saturation, and you get into the mandatories, then we start to drive morale. So while overtime's not always a bad thing, it can become a bad thing if it's not properly managed.
So you're thinking, without having the exact, we're gonna be $500,000 in overtime by the end of the year?
I think that's what it looks like we're on pace to be. Now, remember, some of our training stuff creates overtime. But before I miss it, I just want to thank Sonia and the team behind me for all the work that they've done as well, because Sonia's put a load of work in this area. Without her, I couldn't be sitting here today being as prepared to that. So I want to make sure there's always recognition for the team behind the face.
From our conversations, that I am concerned about stress and fatigue and people having 2 full-time jobs, 1 full-time here, and then going to Frederick or Prince George's to work another full-time job as a firefighter. And, I don't know how to address that issue. I look forward to continued conversation, but, the people are doing that regularly.
If I could ask one more question, we're about 10 minutes ahead of schedule. You mentioned a couple times the apparatus fleet replacement. Could you talk a little bit about where we are with the funding? I know in years past, just in my tenure, it's been on, it's been off again, but it's been rather consistent the last couple of years.
So we have full funding for the apparatus, and it's ordered, and we're expecting delivery either towards the end of this year for the ambulances, or sometime, I don't know if Chief Jacobs can speak to that, or early next year. But that's the apparatus, but there's equipment that needs to be on the apparatus, so that it's what we call ready reserve, and that makes it to where we can drive it to a fire station. There isn't a lot of work to get it ready for service, other than maybe put air packs on it, some portable radios, and it's ready to go for the volunteers, or even our career staff. I say the volunteers, but our career staff make a big contribution daily too, so.
And what about our funding? And maybe that's more of a conversation for our capital plan, but is there an annual allocation that we're putting into the fleet replacement program?
I have not, Michelle, I have not built that capital budget for the replacement at this point, but I intend to do that before I retire. Check out of here so that whoever takes this seat has that coming in, but yes, we would do that.
Okay, so I thought we were actively putting money into a CIP, into the CIP plan for a fleet replacement.
We do have a emergency services vehicle replacement fund, VEH 009. But that's for our current fleet, so we either have to add these into that or build another CIP number for that, and that'd be a conversation with Michelle and Kelsey and how they want that structured.
So it's to replace existing, not as a reserve for our volunteer companies?
Oh, you're talking about an apparatus replacement?
Yes.
Fund. So that was, when I first came here, something I lobbied for, and at one point we had a fund established. I don't know all the mechanics, but I know that, and originally the reserve fleet itself were removed from budgets when we needed to hire firefighters, and that was before the tax changes.
I thought during a recent year budget surplus that we had, we allocated some funding in our surplus to get that program kickstarted.
So can I interject? I think you're mixing two things here. We do have reserve fleet purchased.
Right.
And it's on order, and it's going to arrive in the next year. So I think you're
Was that
a little
one-time
confused.
purchase?
That was a one-time deal.
Okay.
And now you're looking whether we're planning for those replacements of those vehicles. Is that your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought you were talking about volunteer-owned apparatus replacements.
Okay.
If you remember back, and I think you were the county attorney at that point, but we had a fund for reserve fleet, so they were truly loaner trucks, so to speak. And then we had a separate fund where we were working to build an apparatus replacement fund to help the volunteers replace aging apparatus, that at that point it was outpacing their ability to pay for it. That's
Okay.
what I thought you were doing.
So I thought we put some money in during, when we were talking about how to spend down our budget surplus. One of the things that we talked about was buying swiftwater rescue boats with those monies. Is that the same pot of money?
That's when you.
Okay. That was one time only.
So that would, so, yeah, you're talking about the reserve fleet that is on order now. All that money.
All that money.
Earmarked at that point. We bought the reserve fleet, we bought the reserve ambulances, and we bought 4 rescue boats. And we used some ARPA money for SCBA, I'm sorry.
Okay. Maybe then between either you or our budget and finance department, if you could give me a little history, when you have time, in between the budget planning, but how much we have allocated to that program so far and what pieces we have purchased, or what pieces we might have in order, and who they would be made available to. Okay.
Yeah, so I think it's clear now as to what we're talking about, but, so yeah, the commissioners were discussing a reserve fleet. So the money you put aside, so we're actually purchasing that, so we will have, a reserve fleet and boats and other equipment that we're purchasing right now. I know you're talking about establishing some fund to continue to.
My thought is
fund
that's
that,
what
but
we were doing, but apparently
we
not.
actually spent the money to buy, because we didn't have it, right? We didn't have a reserve fleet. so
I
we're
just
actually
thought
spending
going
the money.
forward, we were allocating money into our CIP budget
I think we,
for future
we're-
purchases as well. Okay.
yeah. So we can have those further discussions. I think, obviously, we wanted to use that, especially that money for those to establish that reserve fleet. So obviously, we're gonna have to maintain it and move forward as we.
And just to make sure that, hopefully I can offer some understanding of what the reserve fleet will do. The goal with that is to provide opportunity for the volunteer fire and EMS stations to reduce their capital fleet size, where they, like, there's some stations, and I'm not gonna use anybody, but Company X might only run 300 or 400 calls a year, have maybe 10 or 15 volunteers, do not routinely get 2 Class A apparatus out the door, 2 fire engines. But they own 2 because they need something to use when this one's on maintenance. That's this reserve fleet, that company could make the decision to not have that second engine there, which reduces their fundraising efforts and the work of ownership, so to speak. That's one example of what that's supposed to do. And then if we had the need to surge for some reason, we had some crazy event, then we could put firefighters in these fire trucks and put them in service too, because they are working units.
Any other
Thank
thoughts
you,
or
David.
comments?
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Dale.
gentlemen. Before we move into our next agenda item, we are running a little bit ahead of the schedule. Let's take a 3-minute break. Yeah, you already did. You got to keep working. Okay. What time are we to be over?
Jeff, how you feeling?
Right at noon?
You holding up?
He's awful quiet, ain't he, Derek?
I haven't eaten much.
Okay.
Subscriber radio equipment for the Washington County Sheriff's Office. Rick Curry, good morning.
Good morning, Rick Curry, Director of Purchasing.
Good morning, Tom Weber, Deputy Director at Wireless Communications.
Sergeant Matheny, Washington County Sheriff's Office.
So for your intergovernmental cooperative purchase, INTG 23-0111, subscriber radio equipment for the Washington County Sheriff's Office. Recommended motion to authorize by resolution the approval of the purchase of subscriber radio equipment and the accessories from Motorola Solutions Incorporated of Lincoln Heights, Maryland. The contracted price totaling $65,161.20 based on a contract awarded by the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, also known as COG, contract number MWCOG 21-069. They're replacing 10 dual-band radios, and the Code of Public Law does allow for this board to participate in goods and services procured under another jurisdiction's contract, as long as we adhere to the terms of that contract. The benefit of utilizing that contract is the savings of evaluating the bid, processing the bid. And there is money in the account for the radio equipment. We have concurrence from the sheriff, and also you have the price quote for Motorola attached to the
Motion to approve.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve as submitted. All in favor by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Next item is intergovernmental cooperative purchase, 23-0112, one new vacuum truck for the Department of Water Quality. Rick Curry and Mark Bradshaw. Good morning, gentlemen.
Rick Curry again, Director of Purchasing.
Mark Bradshaw, Director of Environmental Management.
So before you intergovernmental cooperative purchase, INTG 23-0112, for one new vacuum truck for the Department of Water Quality. Recommended motion by resolution to approve the purchase of one new Pick-Right model truck vacuum body mounted on a Mack chassis and cab from Atlantic Machinery Incorporated of Silver Springs, Maryland, at a contracted price totaling $199,584 based on a contract awarded by the Virginia Sheriff's Association. Contract number 23-01-0713, and to approve a budget transfer of $15,000 from account ADM 003 and $15,000 from account ADM 008, transferred to account VEH 010 in the amount of $30,000. The new vacuum truck will replace an existing 2009 truck that exceeds the county's threshold for replacement. The Code of Public Law does allow for this board to participate in the purchase of goods and service on a contract entered by another jurisdiction, as long as we adhere to the terms and conditions of that contract. Again, the cost savings is not doing a preparation of a bid, the solicitation, the evaluation of that bid. And there are funds, there will be funds if you approve the budget transfer to cover the purchase of the truck. And there's an attachment of Atlantic Machinery's price quote. Questions?
Motion to approve.
Okay, motion and second on the floor to approve as submitted. All in favor by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. The next item is sole source procurement, purchase dash 1603, maintenance agreement for Lifepak monitors, defibrillator devices, automated external defibrillators, and Lucas CPR devices.
Good morning, Brandy Nagelbauer in the Purchasing Department.
David Hayes, Director of Emergency Services.
The first recommendation I have for you this morning is the sole source procurement PUR 1603, the maintenance agreement for the Lifepak monitors, devices, automated external defibrillators, and the Lucas CPR devices. Move to authorize a sole source procurement for the preventive maintenance for the Division of Emergency Services for their Lifepak monitors, defibrillator devices, AEDs, and their Lucas CPR devices in the amount of $79,179.54 from Stryker Medical out of Chicago, Illinois. This is a maintenance agreement to ensure that the 9 Lifepak 1000 devices, 30 LP15 monitor defibrillators, and 20 Lucas automated CPR devices are biomedically certified on an annual basis. This agreement also covers the repairs and the software upgrades. The services under this contract, the contract period commenced on January 25th, 2023, and ends January 24th, 2024. DES wishes to apply sections 1 through 106.2A, 1 and 2 of the Code of Local Public Laws of Washington County, Maryland to this procurement. The section states that a sole source procurement is authorized and permissible when, 1, only one source exists that meets the county's requirements, and 2, the compatibility of equipment, accessories, and related parts are paramount to this consideration. This request requires 4 of 5 commissioners to proceed. And the department does have this budgeted in their operating account.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, motion and second on the floor to approve as submitted. All in favor by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next item is intergovernmental cooperative purchase 23-0113, inmate phone services, inmate tablet, inmate visitation, and inmate mail processing services.
Brandy Nagelbauer in the Purchasing Department.
Major Craig Rowe, Warden, Detention Center.
The next recommendation is for the Intergovernmental Cooperative Purchase, INTG 23-0113, inmate phone services, tablet services, visitation, and mail processing services. Move to authorize by resolution for the Washington County Detention Center to use the Prince William County, Virginia contract for inmate phone, tablet, visitation, and mail processing services with Global Tel-Link, doing business as Viapath out of Falls Church, Virginia, based on the pricing structure set forth with the Prince William County contract 502-6188. The Washington County Detention Center is requesting to move forward with combining the services of inmate phone services, tablets, inmate visitation, and inmate processing of the mail into a contract with Viapath. The current contract has been in effect since 2010. This has been renewed annually and amended the contract with IC Solution for 1-year periods. Now, this will end June 30th of this year. The term of the contract, the current contract, did give Washington County a 40% revenue on the phone calls, and this went into the Inmate Welfare Fund. During the most recent 12-month period, inmate calls produced $124,739.42 of revenue based on that 40%. The new proposal for combining all services with Viapath provides that the county will get a 68% revenue on the telephone calls and a 25% revenue on the tablets and the video visitation system. The Code of Public Local Laws of Washington County provides that the county may enter into a contract awarded by another agency as long as we stick to the same terms and conditions. And we will benefit on the cost savings because of the economies of scale set forth. And this is a revenue generating, so it's of no cost to the county.
Motion to approve.
I'll second. I have a question. Can you explain again how this is revenue generating?
So for the inmate phone calls, for example, there's a 12 cents a minute on the calls.
Okay.
And so that we get 68% of that in terms of for the income
income revenue for the Inmate Welfare Fund. Tablets for every message is 5 cents, so we will get the percentage on that as well, so.
Okay. So who pays, I'm sorry, I don't understand. Who pays for the phone call? Either an inmate or their relative that they're speaking to?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Understood. Thank you.
A motion second on the floor. All ready to vote? Any other questions? All in favor by saying aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is he not here? President? Not here?
We can do it when we come back from lunch.
I mean, it's a face informing video, so we can just run the video, or we can come back and do it another time.
What's your pleasure?
Roll that beautiful bean footage. I'll take
We
it.
have a,
There you go. Okay.
we've
Got
got
a
an
motion
obligation to be somewhere
motion to
as
move
well.
forward. So,
We're not just going for lunch, we got a lunch meeting, so roll it and we can do what we want.
Maybe we won't.
anticipation.
And they just send the link to us so we can see it in our.
Screen. Whoops.
Selena Phillips must be hers.
It's not working right. It's not working right. All right, we'll just reschedule.
Can we bring it back?
We'll just bring it back.
Okay. Yep, let's do that. Let's move on to the next item.
The next one.
Okay, with that, we're going to depart, no.
Yeah, we're done.
Yeah, we're done.
Here, we're done. Okay.
The next thing is
Take a recess.
noon at the, just recess until reconvene.
Just got it back.
Motion to adjourn.
Wait a second.
No, we're
Whoop,
not.
okay.
Recess, motion to
Recess.
recess.
Go into closed.
See everybody at the library.
Will this area be prepared so our closed session stuff can be in here if it doesn't matter?
What's that?
Yeah, we can lock the door.
Okay.
We'll lock the door.
Was built in 1853, pre-Civil War. Through a C&O Canal merchant out of Baltimore, a very wealthy person, but it was handed down.
You don't need to. Who does?
Tammy Baker.